Let's stay on that, exploring the link between mental health and the built environment with two experts. Joining us from the UK is Ben Channon. He's director of the wellbeing consultancy Ekkist. Also with us is Mr Michael Leong. He's senior executive director of SAA Architects as a member company of the Surbana Jurong Group. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Well, let's start with you, Mr Channon. When you look at Singapore, where do you see we have the greatest potential to change our design of our urban areas so that we promote, we encourage, we get better mental well-being?
Sure. So I've not personally been to Singapore yet, although I would love to. So it's hard for me to comment too much on the specifics of what could be enhanced there. I know Singapore has a real focus on green space and biodiversity, which is a huge plus for mental health. As research shows, proximity to biophilia is extremely beneficial to our mental and our physical health. And it can even do incredible things like reduce crime levels and boost our memory. But a lot of it actually links back to evolutionary psychology. So at Ekkist, we're often doing thought experiments like, how would a caveman react to this city? Because we've all evolved ultimately to need things like access to daylight, social interaction, a feeling of safety and control, physical comfort, and of course, that interaction with nature. So by including all of those things in the design of cities, we can ensure that the vast majority of people will react positively to them, and then we'll see a benefit in their mood and their overall mental health.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chen. Mr. Leong, let's bring you in on this. In fact, I found what he said interesting. So we take it as a given that we all want this or we all want that in our urban environments. But as Mr. Channon mentioned, we have evolved to want certain things that maybe a few hundred years ago people did not want. Now in Singapore, or Mr. Channon has not been here, but you work here, you live here, you know the constraints that we face. What are the compromises Singapore may need to make so that we meet the needs of greatest priority?
Yeah, I think, Wei Su, that's a very interesting question. One of the things that has always fascinated me is that even though we are such a dense city-state and we have a lot of competing needs, we are still able to achieve close to 40% of greenery coverage as an entire country. So that has always told me that we are actually a group of people who, in a way, have no choice but to look at the kind of resources that we have in our hands and to make the best use out of it. So I think those are very real competing needs. But I feel that over the last decades of developing as a nation, we've really come to the ability to make the best out of the little that we have, such as just squeezing out the little bit of unutilized space in pockets of urban environments. In recent years, we've been looking at even spaces underneath the MRT viaducts. That allows us to actually convert.
Sorry to interrupt you. You talk about 40% greenery coverage. It's good. Ideally, we would like even more. But then, I suppose the question is, that comes at the cost of something else. So when we've got companies like Mr. Channon's, when he talks about looking at how we have evolved, how do we know? What kind of data have we got to determine we need to have 40% of greenery coverage in Singapore?
We certainly do not have data that tells us that it's 40% exactly.
Well, roughly.
Right, yeah. However, we have studies that are telling us that the presence of greenery in our physical environment, be it just being in a park, being in a garden, or even just looking at greenery, does have health and well-being benefits to us. So I think having that knowledge is very important because it takes a lot of time for us to create an environment that makes that possible. So, I think in a way, this is a case of the more the merrier.
More the merrier, but the problem is for us, we don't have a lot more because our resources are always relatively limited. Let's bring it back in, Mr. Channon. Singapore is just one, you've heard Mr. Leong there, the various challenges we face here, an island with on many fronts, fairly limited resources. But if we look worldwide, this is a very broad question, but is there one challenge that you can see, or at least one or two challenges you can see worldwide that you meet whenever you think of designing urban spaces to address well-being needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the issue you mentioned there of density is a really important one. It's something we're obviously seeing with 55% of the world's population now living in urban environments. We've got to think about density and particularly issues around transport and traffic and the role that that can play in terms of people's physical and mental health. I think it's important to note too, we're living in a time where we are seeing mental health crises around the world, wherever you are in the world. And of course, a lot of this is linked to technology and information overload. We certainly see this actually as an opportunity for the built environment, because buildings and cities are an excellent way actually to get people away from their screens, get them engaging with the world around them. So this is why we're always advocating for buildings and places that engage our senses, that make us more active. Actually, they're interactive. They encourage us to look up from our phones. But I would actually say the biggest challenge really is a political one. It's about leaders and governments understanding this link between buildings and cities and health. Once they start to realise that creating better places will actually mean better health outcomes for their populations, suddenly it makes more sense to increase investment in housing and investment in cities, because governments will start to realise this will save them money in the long term in terms of reducing healthcare costs, reducing costs, say, of caring for ageing populations. So actually, spending on buildings, spending on architecture and urban design is just like spending on healthcare.
All right, final question to both of the gentlemen, and Mr. Leong first, and picking up from Mr. Channon's last answer. So he was talking about the lack of political will, the inability to see that a lot of health problems, if we start from our buildings, they can be preventive. Can you give, so away from broad generalities, an actual example of an element you would like to see concretely incorporated in design, specifically to address mental well-being? First, Mr. Leong, and then Mr. Channon, just pick up directly after. Don't wait for me.
Yes, I fully agree with what Ben is saying. And I think one of the things that we should certainly try to do more is the incorporation of opportunities for communities to come together. One of the things that has also been shown to improve well-being a lot is the ability for people to form long-lasting bonds with one another. And therefore, if you are to incorporate these public spaces where people can come together in gatherings, whether small group or large group gatherings, just to be able to keep up their friendship, especially so if it's an intergenerational setting and interaction, I think those will go a long way in enhancing the well-being of everybody.
Mr. Channon?
Yes, I absolutely agree with what Michael said there. And we're actually seeing some excellent examples of placemaking and community-led projects here in the UK. We had a Sterling Prize winner recently, Goldsmith Street Housing by Michael Rich's Architects, and also Marmalade Lane by Mole Architects is a really good example, if anyone would like to look those up, of really putting people at the heart of design. And ultimately, I think that's what this is all about. It's about putting people first and thinking about the end user before anything else. If I had to pick one other thing to add to that, again, I think I would come back to, how can we make cities more active? Can we actually prioritise pedestrians? Can we prioritise cyclists ahead of car use? We know that even just something like walking for half an hour a day provides so many amazing benefits for both our physical and our mental health. If we can encourage people to do that rather than take their car, then that will have an enormous impact on their mental health.
So just from this short interview, we've got 3 priorities: greenery, face-to-face meetings, and keeping people active. Thanks so much for joining us this evening, Mr. Ben Channon, Director of Wellbeing Consultancy, Ekkist, and Mr. Michael Leong, Senior Executive Director of SAA Architects. Thank you.